everyone, and welcome back to Teaching So Everyone Can Learn, a podcast from the Center for Faculty Excellence at New York Tech. I'm your host, Fikayo Edubemi, a faculty development specialist with the Center for Faculty Excellence. This season, we're exploring belonging as student success. What does it mean to belong on a college campus? And how can we, in our different roles, create spaces that support every student's sense of connection, identity, and growth? In this episode, I'm joined by Dr. Mena Youssef, a teaching associate professor of biological and chemical sciences here at New York Tech's Long Island campus. Mena earned his PhD in chemistry from NYU in 2019 and then completed a postdoctoral teaching fellowship there, working with students from non-science majors in chemistry and material science courses. Mena joined New York Tech in 2020 and has developed and taught a number of courses aspiring to motivate his students to understand the universe on a molecular level. Mena also serves as the program director for New York Tech's combined BSDO program, supporting students on their journey into medicine. His current research interests include chemical education and student-centered pedagogy. He is currently studying the efficacy of using various educational technologies in undergraduate chemistry classrooms and enhancing course curricula guided by student feedback and performance. Mena, I'm excited that you're here with us. Welcome to the podcast, and I look forward to our conversation today.
Yeah, thanks a lot for the introduction, and I appreciate the invitation. I'm really excited for our conversation here today.
Excellent. So just as a quick opening, can you tell us a little about what you teach?
Yeah, so I teach both introductory and intermediate chemistry courses here for the Department of Biological and Chemical Sciences. And as needed, also upper level, advanced level, like elective courses, core required courses. It really just depends on the department's need. And every course is different, kind of has its own flavor. But there is a common thread of my interest in chemical education, being able to engage the students in the classroom, like researching, thinking of strategies that will help them in their learning, and making sure they're at the center of the classroom, that their learning is the focus. And so at least that's a common thread, even though, in a given semester, I might be teaching 4 different chemistry courses. There is some sort of common thread that runs through all of them.
Wow, that's actually quite incredible. But I think it's also great to have you here then in that case, because it means you have such a rich perspective and you see different students at different levels, which is great insight for us to discuss and unravel here. So to kick us off, I would love for you to tell us how you define belonging in your classroom.
Yeah, so belonging in the classroom, I would say it's really students recognizing that their presence in the classroom matters. So it's not just that they have to check off their Monday and Wednesday attendance or their Tuesday and Thursday attendance, is that they feel that them actually being there matters for their learning, and that their presence is contributing to their learning, and potentially also the students around them. So their presence actually matters for the learning of the other students in the classroom as well. Things like that, I think, get diluted in very large classrooms, right? If you're in like a 600-person classroom, which we don't have at New York Tech, right? We don't have a space that can accommodate all that. But especially for the smaller classrooms, right, where the students feel like their opinions and their discussions that they're having with the instructor and or their peers actually matters. And so it's all about students knowing that, them feeling valued, and that I actually care whether or not they also learn and succeed in the course. All of these things kind of blend together into the students actually having this image of they actually belong to something. They belong to their classroom. They actually have a say in what they're learning, how they're learning, and also being able to vocalize all of that.
That's such a great point. It's like trying to make the students feel like they're at the center of their own learning, which is a really great way to think about belonging, which makes me curious about how you came to that definition. What was your evolution to that point of this is how I define belonging?
Yeah, I think it's a mixture of a few things. But part of it is just experience, hearing positive feedback from students and saying, hey, I really felt like I had a say in what I was learning in the classroom. I felt like my opinion mattered. So part of it is just feedback from students, which we can talk about. I solicit a lot of feedback from my students, maybe to the point where some people might say it's too much, but that's definitely part of it. And I think another big part of it was when I was a graduate student, I took a course about preparing future faculty. It was a 1-year course. It was 2 semesters. Not for credit, but it was just something I knew I wanted to go into education. And so I took that course, and a lot of these approaches to student-centered pedagogy and using feedback from students, the way you write your syllabus, the way you communicate with your students, all these things were being brought up in that course. And so I can definitely say that had a large impact on hitting the ground running in my first year when I joined New York Tech, and really being able to implement those strategies and keeping belonging, a sense of class community at the forefront of my mind when I was in the classroom.
Nice. That makes so much sense. So I can see like a lot of that definition also came from you being intentional about wanting to be a faculty, a professor, a teacher that makes students feel like they are part of your classroom community, which is excellent. I love that. Okay, so you mentioned that you take a lot of student feedback. So I am interested in learning like what the specific things that you do in your classroom that make students feel like they belong.
Yeah, so I think that's a long list. I think I guess to start off with is learning students' names. Right? You can't feel like you matter. You can't feel like you belong somewhere if someone doesn't know your name. And so what I've actually done for my general chemistry, organic chemistry courses, which are like introductory and intermediate courses that are typically a bit larger. So my classroom sizes are like 40 to 50 students, 60 if it's a really, really large class, which is a large class, and especially for teaching multiple sections. So for example, last semester I was teaching about 80 students in my general chemistry courses and 60 in my organic. And so that's a little overwhelming in terms of getting to know every student personally. But what I did was their first homework assignment for the semester, which is a graded assignment, and it contributes to their homework grade. I have them post a short video introducing themselves. How do I pronounce their name correctly? And like one interesting thing about themselves. And I actually watched, I did limit it. I told them it has to be under 60 seconds because it is 150 or something students. And so 1 minute per student, but I actually watched every single video. I learned their names. And by about the 4th week of the semester or 5th week of the semester, I could confidently say that I knew every student's name. And when they would raise their hand, I'd call on them by name. And this really helps, them feel like I see them, I'm listening to them, I know who they are. So I'd say that's a really, really strong approach. A few other things could be like being available for your students. This goes beyond office hours, how responsive we are to their emails, if we use discussion boards and online posting, how active are we there? I think being flexible is also an important point. If we end up taking a bit longer on a discussion in class, is that the end of the world? Is it not the end of the world? Can we just continue that dialogue? Can we kind of just change our pace to accommodate an interesting and lively discussion or addressing a question in the classroom? I know we work a lot. So in the biological and chemical sciences department, there's a lot of overlap in the courses that students are taking. So the students are taking my chemistry course along with a biology course. And so me having an ongoing dialogue with my students and their biology professor, making sure if we can avoid conflicts with exam timing, let's say, right? If I don't have to give a chem exam the same day as the bio exam, if I could just postpone it, right, push it back one day, just to give the students a bit more breathing room. Again, that's not the end of the world. I can do that. I can accommodate it and be a bit flexible.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I'm also like, you mentioned sometimes if a conversation is taking longer than the class time, it's like, it's not the end of the world, we can continue the dialogue. I'm curious about how you balance that line, because something I've also come to learn is that, particularly for the STEM, there is a lot of course content to cover, but you also want to make sure that you're not just transferring information to like passive students. You want them to be very much engaged in the lesson, but that can take time. So how are you balancing making sure you're hitting all the key content notes, but still creating room for activities that make students feel like, oh, I'm part of a learning community and they're actually connected to their learning?
Yeah, that's a really good point, and it's tough. I think it's one of those things where it's trial and error.
Mm-hmm.
You don't truly know how long you're going to spend on a a bit of content or a class session until you actually get there and do it. But that being said, again, the curricula, class sessions, these are always ongoing projects, and they always. I mean, I'm revising my slides. I'm revising my approach slightly every semester, even if it's the same course. And so I would say I actively take notes, like in class. I might actually pause the class for a second to tell the students I'm going to take a note on something I want to implement next semester or next class session, for example. And they I don't think they see it as a disruption. They actually appreciate it, and they see that I'm putting in some effort into or thoughtfulness into my approach. But I would say it's a case by case basis. You know, if a student asks a question which I feel like is related to the course content and it might derail the lecture a little bit, I might entertain it and say, interesting question, let's actually talk about this. But on a different situation where I feel like the student asks a question and maybe we'll get to it later in the semester or in the second semester of a 2-semester course, this happens from time to time. I get a student ask me a question, well, can you please explain how come this is true for one chemical reaction, but it's not true for the next? I might say, you know what, that's a really good question. Can you please make a note of it? And we're going to revisit that next semester in the 10th class session or something like that. And then when it actually comes time, when that next semester comes, I will actually allude to that question. I'll say, hey, do you all remember when a question was asked last semester about this chemical reaction? Well, here's the true reason why this applies to one reaction or the other. So it kind of builds that continuity. And even though, yeah, I wasn't able to answer the question on the spot, the student still feels kind of validated in that their question was actually answered later on.
Yeah, I really like that. And also like affirming to the student to like, oh, this is very important and I will address this at a later time. And then actually remembering and addressing is like, it shows that you're such a thoughtful teacher and like you really do take your time to connect to your students, make notes, understand like how the lesson is flowing and how the students are like fitting into that lesson. Which also brings me to another question, which is you did mention that I think I'm coming back to this again, but you mentioned about feedback.
Yes.
And I would love to know how you are creating space for the feedback and also how you are implementing the feedback as well.
Yeah, so I think this is a big one. This is my favorite one.
Okay.
Because I think students, especially at the undergraduate level, you know, I'm not really trained. I don't know how this works in like the K to 12 level, but at least for undergraduates and definitely grad students as well, even though I don't teach them as much, they're very good at communicating to us what works for them and what doesn't work for them. And so if we're not soliciting feedback from them, we're kind of missing out on a crucial element of their learning. So for me, in my classes, every single class that I teach every single semester, at least for the lecture component of my classes, I will solicit mid-semester feedback from the students and also the end of semester feedback from the students for every single one of my course sections. And this is nice for us who are teaching at New York Tech because New York Tech handles it for us, right? So the Center of Teaching and Learning can send out mid-semester feedback for us to all of our course sections. We can even put our own personal questions there. And then on the institution level, we also have our end of semester feedback. So those are things that I tell my students to please fill out every single semester for every single one of my courses. There are also times where I'll create my own like Qualtrics or Google form for more specific questions. If I want to get feedback on a specific element of my course that wasn't covered in one of those feedback surveys, I'll also send my own. Mm-hmm. So every single one of my students in my class sections will receive 2 or 3 feedback forms to complete throughout the semester, which I know sounds like a lot, but I have been receiving very high response rates on those surveys, and I think part of that is because of how I use it, how I evaluate it, and then how I communicate it with that student. So it's not only important, in my opinion, it's not only important to just solicit that feedback, but it's also taking your time to read through it. And that's going to take a lot of time, especially with that many number of reports. But sharing the feedback with the students in the classroom while they're there is a very important element. So what I do is when I get the mid-semester feedback, especially, when I get that report, I'll take the weekend. Usually it's the weekend because I'll receive it towards the end of the week. I'll take the weekend to work through it, really read what's working and what's not working, their suggestions, and I'll come to them in the next class session, and I'll take the first 5 minutes of class or so. I'll say, thank you for taking time to respond to these surveys. I know that it doesn't take just 1 minute. It actually takes time from their day to do this if they're doing it honestly. So I'll thank them for that, and then I'll basically show them snapshots. I'll say, you really like doing X, Y, and Z in the classroom, and I appreciate that feedback, and I'm going to continue doing this if I can. And here are also some things that you want changed, or some things that you think don't work very well. Some of those comments I can't accommodate. So, for example, they say, I don't want exams anymore. I'm sorry, you have to have, this is an undergraduate chemistry class. We have to have exams. So I can't change that. However, some of you said, for example, that you want more in-class collaborative problem solving. And so I've noted that, and we're going to actually take 20 minutes at the end of these class sessions to work collaboratively on problem sets. And so I was actually able to implement that in the classroom, for example. So it's things like that that actually the student will come to class saying, wow, the instructor actually read my feedback, and they're actually being responsive. They're doing something about it in the classroom. So I think this is something that's excellent for having the student feel heard and also feeling supported, and that we actually care about their opinion on how they are learning the course material.
Yeah, I have to say, I really love your approach of even sharing the results with the students, because I think it's such a great way to validate to them that, like, I'm actually using your feedback and I see what you're asking me for, giving them reasons for why you're not doing specific things and the things that you will start doing. I think that's excellent, like transparent teaching work. And I'm curious about if you've received feedback directly from students on their own perception of how student voice is being included in your teaching.
Yeah, I think there are always these moments where some students are more vocal than others. So some students who are like, even if something is working or not working for them, they might be more hesitant to do something like that. But for the students who are at least willing to share, and maybe less so in the beginning of the semester, but as the semester goes along, they might kind of warm up to the idea that, hey, my voice actually matters, and so they'll share more. So I think it's things like students who are motivated to engage both with the instructor and their peers in the classroom, right? Being able to feel like they can actually ask a question or even answer a question, right? So some students don't want to answer questions because they're scared of getting it wrong in the classroom, right? Even though it's a low stakes, there's no grade associated with it or anything like that. So students being willing to share their perspective, answer a question, ask a question, these are all things that are positive indicators that the student actually feels like it's a safe classroom environment, right? Students who are willing to collaborate with each other. When students actually work in groups, are all of the students in the group sharing their perspective? Are they all kind of contributing to that? In my situation, it's problem solving, right? So reading a problem, working through it together, doing calculations, showing your work. Is it all of the students feeling that this is a space where they can work together, or is it just one student doing all the work and the other is kind of just copying, right? This can give you some good feedback regarding how the students actually feel about working together in group. And also, of course, the feedback on instruction, right? So are students actually comfortable coming to the professor and saying, you know what, this is really not working for me. Like, is there anything we can do? Is there, and if it's something that's just for one student versus if it's the entire class coming to you with this grievance or this suggestion, this can tell you a lot about whether or not that student feels like they belong in the classroom.
That's so true. That's so true. And you kind of touched on this a little bit, but I would love to know, like, that kind of shifts our gears now to be more specific. How you are, like when you're designing a course. So I know you design like a bunch of courses and you're building out like your syllabi, your activities, your assignments. What are some things that what types of activities are you thinking of? What types of assessments are you thinking of to ensure that you're intentionally designing a course where students feel like they are part of a learning community and they are like an important member of the classroom space?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's one of those things that I think it requires us instructors to take a step back and evaluate our courses and think about how how do our assignments and our curricula align with the objectives and the outcomes of our specific courses. And so
Mm-hmm.
for me, for chemistry courses, a large part of being able to learn and demonstrate your mastery is being able to solve problems. And so for me, homework assignments are which are largely individual. You know, every student has access to a portal where they get asked questions from a pool of questions. Um, Even though that's individual, they receive individual grades. I actually encourage them to work together outside the classroom. I say, hey, why not? Right? Yes, even though this is, you have to be responsible for learning the material. Of course, you can't have another student doing your homework for you. That kind of defeats the purpose. I say, why not work together, right? You two have different questions, but if you're having issues, why not consult each other and help each other through those problems? There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And so, for homework, you know, it's more of a traditional online platform where they're being asked questions, but there are other opportunities for being able to incorporate forms of assessments, not only formative assessment, but also graded assessments where students can potentially work collaboratively. So for me, I actually implemented the use of infographics in my general chemistry classrooms, where students actually collaborate together to develop an infographic on being able to communicate a chemical concept or something that's appropriate for our general chemistry course. And they'll work in groups of 4 or 5 students being able to develop this infographic, which has like an element of visual appeal and creativity. It's something that's a bit different than just simply going on a platform, answering a few questions, or taking an exam, or answering or doing a calculation for some sort of problem. So it's a way of maybe tapping into the students' creativity in a way that they can kind of bring what they learned into an interesting course assignment.
And I think that's also a great way to kind of get their heads out of the like being so deep into the discipline that they can see from a new perspective or like think about what they know and deliver that in a different way. Which I think is a great way to just really check if students understand what they're doing or what they're learning. Is there a particular assignment or activity that you found that works really, really well?
Yeah, so this one that I just mentioned about the infographics, I think has worked very, very well. And I was hesitant in the beginning because conventionally, chemistry courses, it's typically homework, quizzes, exam, lab, pretty much across the board. And so anytime you take away a percentage of the grade and allocate it to something different, there's some hesitance. Some people are hesitant to do that, but I'm really glad I did it. And of course, I told you I solicit feedback. And so when I started implementing this in the classroom, I sent a survey to the students to explain or express to me how they felt about it. And it was largely positive. It was largely positive, and the students actually felt that it was something that they didn't feel like it was a waste of time. They felt like it was actually something that helped them learn about a concept in a deeper context. So a lot of the students, they're choosing something that is not directly mentioned in the class, but it's linked to a course concept. So for example, we talk about specific chemical reactions in the class. Maybe a student will take an infographic and they'll make up their own chemical reaction. But they actually have to use course concepts that we have covered together: balancing equations, being able to express the type of reaction that's happening. Some students will take a lot of my students want to go into the medical fields. And so they'll take a specific approach to like a disease or some sort of drug and explain the chemical structure of the drug and a little bit about what we learned about bonding. again, chemical reactions or drug delivery. And so they're really going a lot deeper into a chemical concept, but still kind of related back to what they learned in the classroom. And so it was very large. It was largely positive in that they really enjoyed that assignment. They felt like it actually made a difference in their appreciation of how the course actually applies to things in their lives.
They're able to make that real world connection, which is what you want, right? You want them to be able to say that this is applicable outside of the classroom.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is fantastic. And I think something else that like kind of popped up to me when you were describing it is they also become really good science communicators when they're doing that work, which is like one of the biggest things in like the STEM field is how do you talk to a lay person around about the importance of the work that you're doing. But having them do an assignment like that, they are developing that skill of how do I communicate this to an outside perspective. And I think that's great.
Yeah, I think a large part of our job is fostering that science literacy. So can students, it's not just can they memorize, because our students are pretty good, at least my students, they're very good at memorization. If I gave them, 2 pages of formulas, I'm confident they can memorize it. It's more of, can you engage with scientific literature? Can you read an article online? Whether it's a general article, like a New York Times article, or a more specific journal article, research or review article, can you read that and kind of internalize what's going on? Can you apply the problem to the real world? Can you actually understand what the issues are, limitations of the study? And then, of course, can you eventually solve that problem? If you were equipped with with the appropriate tools, the appropriate instrumentation, do you have an idea of how we can actually begin to address these problems? So these are all things that we want to plant seeds early, and then as a student is kind of growing on and potentially doing research in the future, being able to tackle and grapple with these issues.
And it makes them like really good critical thinkers, which is what you want, right? Like now that we're going into an age where you can offload a lot of that mental processing to like technologies, artificial intelligence tools, how do we still make sure that students are developing critical thinking skills that are discipline specific? And it sounds like a lot of the work that you're doing is getting at that challenge. As you're doing this work, what challenges have you experienced, and how have you overcome those challenges?
Yeah, I think there are some moments where, if we're talking specifically about, are we talking specifically about like a sense of belonging in the classroom, or is it more broad, the question? Like what type of challenge?
It's specifically around the work of designing classrooms that where students feel a sense of being in.
There are 2 things come to mind for me about this. The first one is timing. So this might be a specific issue for me in my classes, but it might also be general. I'm not sure. I would say the timing of the classrooms, I only meet with the students twice for 1 hour and 20 minutes for the lecture at least, and then they have 3-hour labs as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so when there are certain techniques, active learning techniques, collaborative assignments, collaborative exercises, which would greatly foster and greatly improve, I would say, collaboration among students in the classroom and really build a tight-knit community. Now, with 1 hour and 20 minutes twice a week, sometimes I struggle with being able to do these types of things every single class or every single week even, especially if we end up falling a bit behind in a class session, right? Now, again, it's not the end of the world, right? You can always adapt. If we do fall behind, there are asynchronous opportunities for providing students with resources that they can kind of do, like flipping the classroom, kind of giving them something to do at home, and then coming in the next section, being able to engage with a discussion or a collaborative type of problem-solving session. But that being said, timing, I think, is a struggle for me, and I'm still kind of working through the best strategies. I might have to go a direction where I have to flip a larger percentage of the classroom so that we actually do have more time in class to work on those problem sets, work collaboratively, and give a bit more space. So that's one challenge. The second challenge is really being able to hit the ground running a bit more in the first semester. So these are largely for students who are coming in from high school, students who come in in the first month of classes in college it's a large shock, I think, for them, right? The transition between high school and college. And I've never taught at the high school level, so I'm again not really quite sure the level of engagement, collaboration that they have in the high school classroom. So when they come into a college classroom, I'm sure it's a large shock if they're in a huge lecture hall, right? Because they're probably not taking, again, 4, 5, 600 students in a lecture hall in high school. But they also might not be in an environment where it's a smaller class and they're actually like obligated in some way to provide their opinion. And so it's really starting like a challenge could be starting early and really communicating to the student like your voice in the classroom matters. And so for me, one way I approach that problem is again with that first homework assignment where it's, they have to get behind a video camera and they have to record themselves, post it on Canvas, tell me something interesting about you, how I pronounce your name. And it kind of gets them in the mindset that, hey, I have to contribute something to this class and to be able to get something out of it. And then the sooner I learn their names, the sooner we kind of have that good rapport that's ongoing throughout the semester, the more comfortable they can actually get earlier on in the semester. And that really carries through, especially for me where it's a 2-semester course. That second semester, they all know that I know their names. They're seen. It's not like they can just hide in the corner and do their own thing. Like I'll call them out, right? I'll call them out if I see that they're not, and they know that. It's like it's that relationship where it's been like 8 months. They know that I see them. They know that that they have an expectation, that I expect things from them in the classroom, just like they expect things from me in the classroom, right? I can't just show up and sit behind a podium and just watch them for an hour and 20 minutes. They expect some things of me and I expect some things of them in return.
I think like you have such a great setup too of having that 2-semester interaction, because then you can set up like the expectation and everything in the first semester, and then by semester 2 they're like, okay, I understand how this class works. Now I can like feel more stable. I can get my sea legs essentially in semester 2 because I understand how my teacher works or how my teacher wants me to show up in the classroom. I also think your challenges are very like, I think they're definitely general. I don't think it will be specific to you because, again, the thing with a lot of active learning strategies is that you do have to really think like more intentionally about, okay, what do I want to put outside of class and what do I want to do in class? And how does that align to my learning goals? Like, how is that actually enriching the students' learning versus not? So I think that challenge makes a lot of sense. And the approach, honestly, of like just saying like, oh, let me experiment and like try this way and see how it works out for the students. It's just because you're collecting a lot of feedback from them as well. So you're really getting like firsthand insights of, is this working for them or should I change it back to like, should I change how I'm doing this one thing? I think that makes a lot of sense. And also the thing of like trying to easing students into a new learning space versus wanting them to actually quickly get into the motion and into like the spirit of the classroom I think that's like a real challenge that lots of teachers like feel. So I think that lots of people will resonate with you as they've heard you.
I think it's interesting that you mentioned making specific decisions. I was just at a chemistry conference, and I was more. It's a general conference, and so I was specifically attending the sessions where they were talking about education, chemical education, and you're being exposed and you're having conversations with faculty from all over the world. Really, it's the largest chemistry conference that happens every year. And you're being exposed to so many interesting ideas, different ways of grading, different ways of setting up the semester, different laboratory activities, lecture activities, active learning strategies. You're kind of bombarded with all these things over the span of 3 days. And it's overwhelming because you hear a lot of good ideas. But then, like you said, you don't have time and you don't have the space to be able to implement all of them. Like actually that would be probably overwhelming for you as an instructor and overwhelming for the students as well, right?
Yeah.
Imagine like a flipped classroom. On top of that, you have like 5 different educational technologies and 5 different methods of assessment. It's just going to be too much. like the good news here is that you don't have to do everything, right? You don't have to do everything. You can make small changes and record and monitor how they change and impact the classroom and your students,
Mm-hmm.
and you can make adjustments as needed. And because every classroom is different and every cohort of students is different, you might leverage one active learning technique over another, and that can change. And and this is where flexibility comes into play, right? It's very rare that I'll probably encounter an instructor who's been teaching the same exact way for year after year after year. A lot of flexibility and adaptability is required, especially where technology is at the forefront now. Educational technologies are changing every year. They're implementing, like you mentioned, artificial intelligence. These are all things that are changing from one day to the next. And so I think there is some good news here in that even though, yes, there are so many things out there, we don't have to do everything, right? We can just make these incremental changes and monitor how they work.
Yeah, I think that's excellent advice and excellent insight to share. So there's a thing that typically comes up when it comes to conversations around cultivating belonging in the classroom, creating inclusive teaching. And the thing that typically comes up is that there is a sense that faculty, professors might have to sacrifice rigor in favor of creating a more inclusive space, a space where students feel like they belong. What advice can you give to folks who are worried about this? Like, oh, will I be giving up rigor in order to create like this type of teaching? And how do you balance or navigate that space of, I want students to feel welcome in my classroom, but I also want to challenge them and make sure that they are rising to the occasion of their learning?
Yeah, I definitely don't think there's any contradiction between making sure the classrooms are like inclusive and student-centered and having a strong sense of belonging and the rigor associated with the coursework. I think we can definitely manage to accomplish both objectives. And I can speak for my own courses personally. For example, sacrificing some of my lecture time to have the students work together in groups for problem-solving sessions. I don't feel like I'm really sacrificing any rigor in my courses because even though I'm speaking at them less, right, I'm lecturing a little less, they're still being able to deal with and engage with the course content in a different way. Mm. And not only that, but them working together, it's not like I'm just sitting in the front of the room. I'm actually walking around the classroom and I'm answering their questions. If I'm looking at their notes and I notice that something's a little off with the calculation, I might say, hey, watch out for that negative sign, or hey, are you sure that's the correct equation that's appropriate for this problem? So I'm still engaged with their learning, just in a bit of a different way. And that being said, there's still, at least for my courses, I still have that element of the summative assessments, the exams, that are pretty much unchanging. There's still, of course, the questions will change from semester to semester, just because I'm not going to recycle the same questions for every exam. But the level at which I'm asking those questions is pretty much the same, right? Because it's the same introductory or intermediate chemistry course that I'm teaching. And so I'm expecting a student who completes this course, they have to have a certain amount of foundational knowledge, a certain level of, depending on what level of the level of learning that they're expected, right? The questions that I'm going to ask them have to reflect that. And so just because my methods are slightly different than another instructor's, or just because so not only the lecturing or the strategies, the active learning strategies that we're using in the classroom could be different, but also the forms of assessment, the ultimate objectives are the same. So as long as we're accomplishing those objectives and the students can actually demonstrate their comprehension and mastery of those concepts, I think we're in a good place. So I don't think there's an inherent contradiction between making sure we have a student-centered classroom and that students have a sense of belonging and actually accomplishing our desired learning outcomes as well.
Well said, well said. I think I completely agree with that. And I love how you also summarize that of like, as long as students are meeting the objectives and they are demonstrating mastery of the skills, then ultimately you accomplished the goal of the classroom and you maintain that rigor. And I think that's the most important thing that we keep coming back to throughout this conversation is ensuring that there's alignment between what we're doing in the classroom and the learning outcomes of the course. So I'm going to shift gears now, and we're going into our rapid fire questions. I'm going to ask you 5 questions of practical strategies that instructors can do in the classroom. Can you share one thing that you do in the first week of class to set the tone for belonging?
Sure. So this goes back to feedback. So what I do the first week, actually the first day of classes, where we go over some course policies, some introductory course concepts, what I do is I actually bring the feedback from the students who took the course the semester previously. So I will synthesize the end of semester feedback, and I will actually share that with my students, the new cohort of students in that semester on day 1. And I'll say, hey, this is what students who took this class last semester liked, what they didn't like, some of their feedback, some of the things that they wanted to see, and how I took their feedback into consideration when I develop the syllabus or change the syllabus and when I'm teaching the course this semester. So this actually sets the tone very early. Hey, I really do look at your feedback, and you should feel encouraged to share with me the things that work and that don't work for you. And so that happens on day 1. And I like to think that it sets the tone for keeping that open dialogue between me and the students.
So what is one way you check in with students throughout the semester?
So I think everyone's going to know the answer to that question. It's going to be mid-semester feedback. Again, every single course section I teach every single semester, I will ask the students to give me mid-semester feedback. And again, I share that feedback with them. Usually the mid-semester feedback here at New York Tech takes place in right around the middle of the semester. And I think we get the feedback right at the final third of the semester. So you still have some time there to make any last minute adjustments. And at least, if nothing else, it'll inform you for your upcoming semesters what you can do a little differently.
So what is one strategy you've tried that surprised you but really worked?
Something that I actually started 2 academic years ago was something that doesn't take much time, but I actually heard through the feedback of the students that they appreciate it, which is sending an announcement prior to the start of every single week. Even if the announcements seem a little bit repetitive, students actually appreciate them quite a bit. And what I'll include there is just some reminders, if their assignments due, even though they have the due dates and they get notifications from Canvas, they seem to really appreciate being reminded one additional time, but also what to expect from the course that given week. So I'll give them, if the course meets twice per week, I'll give them just a breakdown. Hey, on Tuesday, we can expect to cover X, Y, and Z. We'll have this discussion. We'll have this problem-solving session. And on Thursday, we'll start a new chapter. And this is what's anticipated to be covered on Thursday's class session. I got a lot of really positive feedback in that they really like that structure, and that they kind of come into each week with an organized thought process, right? I know exactly what is going to happen this week, and I can appropriate my time accordingly.
So what is one small shift that had a big impact?
So I would say the largest one was really taking that class time into the 5 minutes, maybe maximum 10 minutes at the beginning of the class to share the results of the feedback with my students. And what I noticed is, because they do feel like their voice is heard, they are more encouraged to give you feedback moving forward. And so I noticed for my mid-semester and end of semester feedback, for the classes that I share the feedback results with the students, they are more likely to give you more feedback and meaningful feedback moving forward. Like my mid-semester and end of semester feedback forms, they're not just simply, does the instructor help you learn the material? Yes or no. No, they'll actually respond with sentences saying specifically what is being done. And so I'm seeing more responses from students that are more specific that I can actually use. And I'm also seeing increased response rates. So I'm seeing response rates that are like above 85, 90% semester to semester, which is really encouraging for me. In a class of 40 students, for example, for me to have a 90% response rate, that gives me a lot of ideas from the students, it really shows me that the students care about giving me feedback on what's working, what's not working for them in the classroom.
Yeah, I really like that. I think I've affirmed this throughout our conversation, but I really think it's such a great strategy to show them that I am taking your feedback and I am always taking feedback from you and making changes based on that. And also the fact that you explain to them why you're not making a specific change also I think that has such a great impact because they're like, okay, I get it. And I understand like where you're coming from. So I think that makes a lot of sense.
I know this is like a rapid fire question, but I do have one small thing to add there.
Okay.
Specifically for things where where you say no to a student or a group of students who request something, I think it's important to also bring in educational research if you can. So I'm flexible for my classroom for note taking. If a student wants to take notes with pen and pencil or with their tablet, like an iPad or something, or even a laptop, even though I discourage laptops, I actually share with them like articles, peer-reviewed articles from educational journals, which show that one form of note-taking may be better than others. And so I'll say, hey, you have the freedom, but this is what the educational research shows. And then if it's something more along the lines of, I'm going to say no to a specific approach, I'll try to back up my position with either personal experience or educational research, like I mentioned, just so it doesn't seem like I'm just being unreasonable or I'm haphazardly saying yes or no to certain things over others. I try to actually, because again, they're mature enough to actually understand the decisions that are being made. If they're being made because I'm educating myself on either student feedback or peer-reviewed literature out there, they do appreciate that open communication.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Like you're showing them your workings and you're modeling that type of behavior of you are sharing the reasoning behind your work. And I think like it would even have a longer effect too for how they would approach other people and how they would like make decisions and how they would communicate their decision making. So that sounds fantastic. Okay, so the final one is one reminder you keep coming back to when things get tough in the classroom.
Yeah, we're always going to have those moments, I think, where we struggle in the classroom. One session doesn't go exactly as we want it to. But for me personally, I like to go back to the moments where I made a difference in the student's life. So whether it's like an email that I get from a student mid-semester or at the end of semester expressing their gratitude, or if it's something like them coming back after the course was even completed and saying, hey, I'm taking this course right now, and we just discussed this concept, and I thank you for stressing last semester, this concept in chemistry because it's helping me a lot this semester. Or if they send you a note, right, thanking you for something that you did for them throughout their time in the course, or thank you for your effort. I know New York Tech has these thank you notes, thank you professor notes that sometimes, that students are able to send to their instructor. So leaning on these things helps keep me motivated, right? That I'm actually making a difference in their learning, in their life, and being able to support them for succeeding in the future. It's always nice to go back to that when we do have those inevitable moments where we're struggling a little bit through the semester, or if we feel a little down that something didn't work exactly the way that we wanted it to.
I love that. I think like it's also the students, as you affirm your students, they are also affirming you. And that's a lovely like cycle to keep going on and on and on. So I think that sounds really perfect. Yeah. Well, those are all the questions I have for you. Thank you so much for being here and sharing your perspective and your experience. And this has been such a great and thoughtful conversation.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I enjoyed the conversation very much.